All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast. On this week's episode, we have a special guest, Damir Firšt. Damir is a Croatian tech entrepreneur and the co-founder of Matterless Studios. Matterless is a tech startup that innovates within the world of AR, or augmented reality. In this episode, we're going to learn about what they're working on and the man behind it. Damir, thanks for coming on the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Thank
And
you for coming on. I'm
I,
excited. I'm excited to talk with you about, AR. I know that's a sort of a high level topic, so hopefully you'll be able to dumb it down enough for me to understand. I just upgraded my iPhone from an iPhone 6 actually just over the weekend, so I'm a little behind technology
what did
wise.
you get?
I got an iPhone 11,
Okay, nice.
which is not even the newest one, but it's like 3 or 4 behind, I guess. But I didn't want to go full out, I'm going slowly into technology.
Yeah,
Um,
whatever is comfortable for you.
Exactly, yeah. Before we get into some of that heavier stuff, would you mind talking a little bit about your background, where you're from and, sort of how your life led up into you becoming this augmented reality expert?
Well, up until I was 24 years old, I was living in Zagreb. I was born in Rijeka, grew up in Zagreb, and then at 24, I got a scholarship to go live in Japan for a year. At the time, I was doing my master's degree in art history and sociology here in Zagreb, and I also got very interested in Japanese. I was doing martial arts at the time. So I learned how to count to 10 and how to say left, right in Japanese. And I was like, maybe I should learn Japanese. How hard can it be? I already know everything I need. So I ended up going to Tokyo in 2008 and spent a year there where I was learning the language, culture, studying martial arts. And when I came back, I was very interested in doing my master's thesis in Zen aesthetics. So, as an art historian, I was always very interested in Asian art. So I was also really into Zen through martial arts and meditation. So I ended up doing a topic that probably nobody wrote about in like Croatia ever, about Zen aesthetics. And through that, I got interested in Chinese language because Chinese language is kind of like the Latin of Asia. So China is the cradle of most of the culture that propagated through Asia. So I ended up learning a little bit of Chinese, got interested in Chinese, started learning Chinese, and ended up in a year's time getting a scholarship to go study in China. So then I went to China originally for a year to do my Chinese and also learn some Chinese martial arts. I ended up staying 11 years in China, and I've
Wow.
done a bunch of different things. I've studied anthropology. I did a PhD in anthropology in Xiamen University. Xiamen is the city I used to live in. It's a small island town of 4 million people, close to Hong Kong. And through a lot of things that I did, teaching in the university, doing all kinds of things, I ended up in the gaming industry because I'm also a massive nerd and I've been playing D&D since I was 13 years old. So it's been a long time that I've been into Dungeons and Dragons. For those of you who don't know, the tabletop game where you get to role play characters, create puzzles, storylines, and so on. And at 35, I decided I wanted to get into the gaming industry. So I got into the gaming industry as a narrative designer, a person who designs storylines, characters, and locations, also quests. If you've ever played a video game where you have dialogue, which branches off into different options, that's kind of what I did. Um, and I realized that gaming really is my passion. So I've been doing that for a couple of years. Last year I came back to Croatia. Realized that the startup scene here is booming. That people are very much in a very different mindset than before I left. It had been 12 years since I've been away, and I loved it. So with a friend from Sweden who I met in China, who lives in Hong Kong. His name is Nils. Nils and I started a little startup for that builds AR companions and toys in something called shared augmented reality. Shared augmented reality is a way for us to all see the same thing in the same place. So by using your device, scanning a QR code, within a second, you can be in a shared AR session, meaning that multiple participants can see the same thing in AR, and also they can touch it by hand. So you can reach out with your hand and touch something digital and it will respond. So if you have a cute digital puppy, you can give it a scratch and it's gonna sense your touch.
And so what's the difference then between AR and VR, virtual reality?
So VR, if you've ever played a video game in which you have a 3D level through which you move, so Counter-Strike, a shooter like Counter-Strike, or a MMORPG like World of Warcraft, any kind of role-playing game where you're moving your character around, this is a virtual world. Effectively, it's a world that you enter, a different world that you enter with your character, and then you interact in these made-up environments. So anything, you can put anything into a virtual world. It can be a medieval dungeon, it can be a base science fiction, like it can be a sci-fi starship, anything really. But the thing is, virtual worlds, they're not real, and VR is a way for you to kind of like enter into a different dimension. So through your screen or through your goggles, you can experience a different type of reality. AR, or augmented reality, is a way for us to build a digital layer on top of our regular everyday material world. So AR would be me sitting here at my desk and then having maybe a virtual monitor, which is not physical, but through my goggles or through my phone, I can see a screen which is projected on top of my wall, for instance. So you can imagine the future being a place where there's going to be a lot of digital content which is going to be interactive and kind of seamlessly integrated into real spaces.
Mm-hmm. I remember last time
if that's a good definition for you.
Yeah, good enough that I can understand it. So I remember last time we spoke before we started recording the other week, you gave like sort of a real life application, outside of the gaming world that this sort of AR can be used. And now I forget off the top of my head what it was. But can you give either that one or another one?
Absolutely. There are tons of examples. So, for instance, AR. One of the ways in which we can use AR is we can have. You can imagine AR kind of like a visual version of a radio station. So all of us can have headphones in, and we can listen to a different radio station. And in a way, the music on a radio station changes your mood, right? So, like if you're listening to music while you're walking around the city. If it's some energetic, happy music or like workout music, you're going to feel more pumped up. If you're listening to, like if you recently went through a breakup and you're listening to sad music, it's going to really color your mood as you're experiencing the world around you. So with AR, we can do that, but visually. We can put all kinds of content, all kinds of digital virtual objects or beings in the world around us. So for instance, you can imagine having an exhibition, an art exhibition, where you walk into a museum and it's an empty room, and then you turn on your AR goggles or your phone through your camera, and you can see digital items in the space floating around. So it can be used in the art world. It can be used in a restaurant. You could, for instance, have a menu where if you scan a QR code, you can see on your device or again on your goggles, you can see the dish materializing in front of you in 3D in all its glory. So instead of looking at a photo, you can see kind of like a 3D image of a interactive 3D image of something that you would like to order or eat in a restaurant. You can use it in education. So for instance, imagine learning a language where if you go into a room, you can see everything in the room. You can see the doorway, the window, the desk, a cup on the table, a pencil. You can see it, and then you can have a notation on top of it in a different language. So imagine how much easier it would be to learn a language if you would have just a layer on top of your everyday material world where you get to see a note in a different language for every single object that you look at.
Huh. Yeah, that's really cool. Those are things I would never have thought of in a million years, to even have. But yeah, that would definitely make a lot of things easier. Learning, especially, I like the restaurant example. That's pretty cool, actually, just to see your dish. appear right there.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to something you said earlier after the introduction. You said in China you were living in a small city of 4 million people, which is, a bigger population than all of Croatia right now. And now you're back here in Croatia. What are some of the differences in life? I mean, I'm sure there's plenty, but any sort of cultural shocks or cultural differences between life in China versus in Croatia?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. They're like, I could talk about this for hours, and especially being a sociologist and anthropologist, this is something that I'm very keenly aware of. But to keep it kind of short and sweet, life in China is incredibly busy and bustling. People are incredibly proactive about changing their social status. So like everybody and their aunt has a company. Like a guy making pancakes on the street has a company. Everybody's like very, very into changing their social status. So I would say people in China are incredibly good at business. They're very much aware of like how to negotiate, how to deal with everyday situations. Very good at connecting connections. They have an incredible economy, which is powered up by the government having a more long-term idea about how they want to run different types of industries and economy. And because of that, life in China has changed incredibly in the last 15 years, I would say. So when I came into China, I didn't even have a smartphone. I got my first smartphone in China. It was an iPhone at the time because I wanted to have a digital dictionary, for instance. And within a couple of years, I was using my phone to buy almost anything. So in China, there's this app called WeChat, which is a kind of a combination between Twitter and WhatsApp and Facebook. And what it does, it allows you to basically send money, receive money, buy a ticket for the train, for the bus, for any event. You can even use it to buy plane tickets or train tickets. You can use it to send quite large amounts of money, I would say up to like $5,000-6,000 a day to somebody else. And now it's integrated into multiple different types of chatting apps and social media apps as well. They have their own reel. They have their own way for you to kind of engage with friends. And, we had that in China like 2014. So I remember one time I went to Beijing, I went to the capital, and I couldn't find my wallet. So I said, screw it, I'll just use my phone. And I did. I went on a 10-day trip where I never had to use my wallet once. I was just scanning a QR code to pay or to enter a certain area. And that's how China has been living for a while now. So the tech in China is pretty impressive. They really changed like everything about how people live there, and it really is affecting the way society works and how people behave. On the other hand, here in Croatia, there's also been quite a big leap in the last 10 years. But after living in a country where you practically can live seamlessly without using any kind of physical money or documents, in some ways it's quite it was quite a shock, like here in Croatia we have something different. We have contactless payment with a card, which is also pretty great. It's now accepted everywhere. So that's like the immediate thing about the convenience of life. When it comes to culture, when it comes to thinking about how humans like live their lives, China is very much like a pressure cooker. So people are very, very, I would say they feel the need to accumulate stuff and to be very much in the mindset of materialism. So a lot of kind of outside views in China are, China is a communist country. But it's really in the way that people live their lives on a daily basis, it's exactly the same as here, if not worse in some ways, because, for instance, you don't have unions, you don't have really a lot of ways in which you can ask for things legally unless you know someone. So in a way, it's quite building up a network of people, acquaintances that you know is very, very important. In some ways, it's very similar to Croatia. Croatia is very much a place where it's also very important to know people to get stuff done. So in that way, I kind of felt in China very similar than I did here. In fact, if I compare China and Japan, I would say, Japan is kind of like the Germany of Asia, and China is like the Balkans of Asia. So in some ways, we are very, very similar.
That's an interesting comparison. How do you, relating it now to business, now how do you go from, China, where you say everything is so business oriented, everyone has their own business, so much more technologically advanced, all these cashless transactions and everything, now coming back here to Croatia and to Zagreb, and to say, oh, there's a, budding tech scene going on in Zagreb. How do you come from China, where everything, seems so much more advanced and in that realm quicker, back to Zagreb and say that it's a, see that it's a good place to have a tech startup?
Well, I was very much surprised by the amount of the younger population really going for building global businesses, which don't have local limitations on for instance, like if you're building software, you can sell it anywhere, right? So it becomes logistically much easier to build a product for the entire world. And this is exactly what most of these people are doing. They're building very cool solutions for multiple things. Like one of the companies that I can mention is called Gepäck, and Gepäck does Gepäck for maybe for your German speaking population, they will know Gepäck is basically the trunk of a car in kind of like bastardized German. And what Gepäck is doing, they're doing something called ride sharing for packages. So if you know BlaBlaCar, where you can just hitch a ride to another city by just simply checking who's going, they're doing the same thing for packages. And for me, this was a fantastic idea because in Croatia, we have this thing where if you were to send something to a different city and you can't use the post office because, for instance, it's the weekend, you can go to a local bus stop and you can send a driver, you can give a package to a driver, to the bus driver, and he will deliver it to somebody else for like, a coffee, like €2 or something. Right. So you can send like a lot of older folk, they send their kids in the cities like food, like tangerines or some sort of pancetta or like any kind of like locally produced stuff. And what these guys did is they tapped into that mind space and they decided to do the same thing. And their tagline is "Someone is already going." So you can just hitch a ride, put the package in the car because somebody is already going. So there are a lot of solutions like this happening right now in Zagreb, where not just in Zagreb, but in the whole Croatia, where you can kind of see this local spirit and our way to solve problems, like getting a tech layer. So that was very interesting for me here in Croatia, because like there's a lot of very innovative stuff happening, and in general, I think Croats are very, very good at IT, and we have like an amazing university for electrical engineering, and we have very, very, very good developers. And one of the ways in which I wanted to be a part of it is by after living in China for so long, staying in Croatia for a couple of years and trying to build up a business which can touch certain areas of commerce and economy and infrastructure here. So I'm not necessarily, my startup is not a Croatian startup. We're actually registered in Hong Kong and Switzerland. But simply by me being here, by the virtue of me being in Zagreb, I can try to offer some of these solutions to, for instance, Zagreb Holding, the city of Zagreb, certain companies, and it feels very gratifying to be able to try to help build the local economy and infrastructure by being here, just by virtue of being here.
Well, how long ago did you start Matterless Studios, your company, and what exactly are you guys working on right now?
Yeah, okay. So Matterless builds digital toys and pets in shared AR. We have started, actually, we started a while back in 2019. We had an idea to build an app which is kind of like an AR ruler. And it was for a board game tabletop game called Warhammer 40K. Are you familiar with this?
It sounds familiar, but I never played it. And
All right. So you have two players who collect armies and then fight these armies on a board, like on a big ass table. So basically, what you need to do is you need to build up an army. So you need to buy the figurines. You need to get the paints because you need to paint them. You need to buy the books, the rule books. You need to buy everything, right? And this company, this UK company, Games Workshop, did a really fantastic sale of their products. So, what if you want to play the game, you buy everything from there. You know, the brushes, the paint, the books, and of course the figurines. And we thought about that, and we said this is a really good business model. Like we want to work with Games Workshop. So we thought about a certain aspect of the game where you have a ruler on a table, and then you use this ruler to like see how far some units are from other units, and you use a physical ruler to like move them around. And we thought maybe we could do that in AR. Maybe we could make sure that the computer vision software that we use is recognizing certain units, and then you can immediately see the distance between them. So you wouldn't have to use a ruler, a physical object.
Mhm.
We did that for a year. We did the Kickstarter campaign. It was pretty successful. And after we nailed the tech, we realized we can use it for much more than just a ruler app within one game. So we realized that we can do now is we can actually precisely position things in AR. By scanning a QR code, you can effectively see the relative distance between different things within that AR session. So when you turn on your camera, something called SLAM opens up. SLAM is an algorithm which recognizes feature points around a certain area. So it will see the outline of a table or how far a wall is. And because of that, it can give you a relative distance from that certain object. And by doing this, we realized we can create something that has never been done before. We can create a way for people to experience things together, because we were able to use that technology to have multiple devices see the same thing in the same place. And of course, this is much bigger than just one game. So we decided to spin out two companies. One of them is called Auki Labs, and Auki Labs does this infrastructure for AR, precise positioning. And then on the other hand, we have Matterless, which is creating the flagship product. So the way to onboard people is by not talking about it the way I just did. It's about giving them something they can really connect with. And we thought long and hard, what can people connect with? A digital thing that might seem real. And we realized that what people really connect with is pets. So for you to kind of understand what we do is, we give you a digital puppy that's on a table. You can see it through your device, but you can touch it with your hand. You don't tap the screen. You go out and reach out and touch it, and it will have a reaction. It will interact with your hand. So it's really cool because when we see kids are very good at kind of immediately responding to it in an intuitive way. So, you know, we give them the phone, they look at, they take the phone, and then they just reach out with their hand to touch the puppy.
So you don't need goggles or the headsets or anything. It's just through your phone.
Well, it's through your phone, but of course, we're getting ready for the fact that a lot of manufacturers are bringing a lot of AR goggles onto the market, which for us is very exciting because you know, at this point, if you're using your phone and you see it through a camera, which you totally can, it's still a little bit limiting because you have to use one hand to just kind of see through it. Mm-hmm. But the moment that the AR goggles and glasses come, it's going to be a complete game changer. In my opinion, and in the opinion of all the co-founders and people who are working on this, once that happens, it's going to be the same as the iPhone coming and changing the way mobile internet works. So 15 years ago, nobody had a phone with no buttons. Like you just didn't associate a phone with like a little magical tile that you can tap and interact with the world and get everything from the latest weather report to any kind of knowledge about science and news. And today everybody's using this smartphone, and it started with the iPhone. Like in 2007, the first iPhone came out, and within 15 years, it completely changed the environment of how we use the internet, what we need to access it. And we believe that the same thing's going to happen when the goggles come.
Well, yeah, you mentioned that it's also Apple headset, right? Or goggles.
Well, Apple is, I mean, there are rumors of Apple coming out with this, and they're always very much very secretive about it. So I couldn't comment on when they're coming, but I've read the news like everybody else.
Mm-hmm. And you think that exponential growth will be just as fast as it was in the the smartphone boom, I guess you can say?
I think it's going to be faster because the rate of adoption is increasing. So I think around 2005, there was around 1 billion people on the internet. And I think now it's around 4 billion people, which means that since the time we got the smartphone, of course, this is not the only factor, but like since we got the smartphone, the rate of adoption has increased because the barrier to entry is lower. You can now buy a phone for $150 that has 4G connectivity. Some for a couple of $100 have 5G connectivity, and that's a massive leap. From 4 to 5, and then of course a massive leap from the amount of stuff you can put on that phone and how quickly it can kind of render stuff around you, create the environment around you as well.
And you also have a podcast that you mentioned. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, yeah. So as a part of our goal to spread the ideas that we are building and working on, we created a podcast called the Cyberdelic Podcast. And what we talk about in the Cyberdelic Podcast is how augmenting reality is this innately human desire to share our ideas and perceptions with other people. And it's quite a mind trip. We talk a lot about transcultural humanism, how our ideas affect the way we live. We talk about the digital reality that's coming. We talk about augmented reality, the technologies needed to make it a mainstream way of life, AI, all kinds of crazy things. That's why it's called the Cyberdelic Podcast. So if any of your listeners are in for like a deep dive down a rabbit hole of what technology is bringing, I think they might like it.
Awesome. Well, I'll have to check that out myself, and I'll include a link to that in the podcast description as well, so people can check that out.
Thank you.
Well, with this exponential sort of rate of adoption and all this new technology coming out, what do you think the future of, I guess, the world, also Croatia, looks like in, say, maybe 10-15 years in terms of new technology and AR?
That's a very difficult thing to say.
I know it's impossible to answer, but I guess just in your opinion, what things do you think will be changed the most?
Well, I think two great battlefields of tech right now are something everybody's talking about, which is AI, so artificial intelligence. And another part of the puzzle is something called spatial internet. And spatial internet is, in fact, if you've heard about Web3, decentralization, this is the kind of stuff that a lot of people in the IT world are very excited about, because AI is something that's very kind of close to the mind of most people. It's been in the meta, in a way, in the culture for a very long time. We can talk about like Terminator since the 90s and so on. But AI is already very integrated into a lot of processes and systems that we have. Spatial internet, not so much, because what spatial internet will do is it's going to basically create like a real life infrastructure in space that you can use to interact with the internet. So as I said earlier, you might have a screen that is projected through your goggles onto a wall instead of buying a new TV. You might have a character, a digital pet that you interact with in real space that serves you as some sort of a companion. You might have Internet of Things, IoT connectivity with every device that you have. So that, for instance, when you come closer to your door immediately unlocks because it has a unique key that only responds to either your device or actually a wearable that you have just for that particular purpose. So there's going to be machines talking to each other much more through RFID. There's going to be also humans connecting with machines much more often than they do right now. And one of the ways that we envision that's going to work is through precise positioning of virtual objects in real space, which you will be able to interact with. So, imagine like you had a lever on the wall or a socket on the wall, which is a virtual socket instead of, not a socket, a switch, like a light switch, you can turn on and off, which is just positioned wherever you want. So imagine like, you have like smart lights, but you can put a virtual object like next to your bed that you can just like wave your hand at, and then, it's gonna turn on and off the lights. There's gonna be also like a really big shift in how we kind of interact with space in our private, in our homes. For instance, if we look at right now, we have a router in the house. You have your Wi-Fi that you can access in any room. Now, imagine if you had a way to position virtual objects into your room that only you and the people who are in your household can see. So you walk in, you scan a QR code, and you see a bunch of notes in your space. Let's say I go for holiday, and you want to come and help me out water my plants. So you come in, you scan a QR code, you look around, and you see all the plants in my house, and you can see above them notes, and it says, water this one once a week, half a glass of water. So or you want to move a couch, and your girlfriend wants you to move a couch, and then you enter into the house and you see a note that says, please move the couch here, right? So this is kind of stuff, kind of like everyday things, conveniences that I think people will be very happy to use. So, whenever we think about how tech evolves, a lot of people think about the macro level. How does it work when you need to build the infrastructure, like how difficult it is for engineers. But we really try to think about like what does the end user do? How does it affect my life? Is it more useful for me? Like, am I going to have more time for myself to hang out with friends, or am I going to be annoyingly checking through manuals on how to change a channel on my television set? And this is why we're also building social AR. So we're building like a social experience which is easily accessed by multiple participants, because you were asking me about the virtual world. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of applications of like virtual reality where you maybe play games, or you have some sort of design sessions where you're looking at how to build something in your own room. But I think that what humans crave the most is this sense of togetherness. And through this sense of togetherness, we really connect. We are now sharing a mind space. We're talking together, and all of our listeners, hopefully they feel engaged and interested in what we're doing. And they're sharing the same room, the same mind space with you and me. Mm-hmm. And that comes from wanting to do that in real life. So instead of creating a virtual world where you access it by yourself, you sit in your room, you see the blue flickering light of your screen while you're in your room by yourself. In fact, what we want to do is we want to bring people together. So instead of us playing a game each one of us on our computer or on our goggles at home. We actually want to meet and do it together. So, humans will always crave this thing where you want to live in a nice neighborhood, you want to have greenery around you, you want to have your friends close so you can go out for a drink. And then once you do, maybe we sit in a bar and we get a couple of drinks, and we play this little game with the cars, which can race on top of the table, and whoever loses buys the drink. These are the kind of experiences that we're really interested in building. They bring people together. They make us feel connected, and I also think that this is kind of what the future is going to be like for most people. Like, it's not going to be you sitting in a room by yourself. It's going to be a bunch of digital stuff that's just kind of floating around in space around you, and you can access it like you do a different radio station, depending on your mood.
Huh. Yeah, well, you sort of hit the nail on the head with the stereotype that, technology is going to make us more isolated. You sort of changed my perspective on that it can, help bring people together even more. And Damir, as we're running down to our last couple seconds here, hopefully I get this off in time, but I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and, sharing everything about you and your company, Matterless Studios, with me here and with all of our listeners.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. I hope your listeners enjoy what we talked about. And if they do, I would love for them to come and check out our socials. They can go to matterless.com to see what we're doing. They can find us on Discord. They can find us on Twitter. And I would love to share our socials addresses with you, if you don't mind, in your episode, to give people a chance to see what we're working on.
Absolutely. I'll share all those links in the podcast description so anyone can check those out. And Damir, thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Beautiful. You can also try our app in the App Store. It's called Floorcraft Arena, and it's tiny little cars that bump into each other and go boom.
Awesome. And loser has to buy a drink.
Loser buys a drink.
Awesome. Thank you, Damir.